This one's called "You Don't Fix Problems by Ignoring Them." So this is something that I've been thinking about doing a video for a while, and it's prompted through observation, just observing a significant proportion of Brits who have, I've observed this like worrying tendency to deny the existence of problems that are plaguing Britain in particular. And I think nothing really will improve until Brits acknowledge the existence of the problems that they're suffering from. Because, as I say, you don't solve problems if you ignore them. A bit like an alcoholic, you know, they always say, don't they, if an alcoholic won't do anything to improve their health if they don't acknowledge and accept that they are an alcoholic. They have to accept that they've got a problem first before they'll garner the motivation needed or summon up the motivation needed to do something about it. And that's what I've been noticing, and I'm going to give you some examples of what I've been noticing. So the first time I noticed this was when we emigrated from England to go and live in Finland in November 2020. So my wife had said, oh, well, Finland's got a constitution, it's a constitutional republic, so there are basic safeguards on human rights. But still, I was really shocked, pleasantly shocked and surprised about what the kind of lockdowns were like in Finland. I think many Finns would say they never really had a proper lockdown here at all. You know, for example, there was no legal obligation at any point for people to wear slave muzzles. You could always get a haircut, you know, it was like pretty normal. So you'd then explain this to people, to Brits, you know, through telephone calls or video chats or whatever. And there was always like two responses. One was anger, and then the other one, it was like coupled up with it really, was denial, you know, that this can't be right, I'm making this up, you know. So that was the first time I noticed it. So I think some of that came from the media. I think the media was telling Brits that everywhere else was exactly like Britain, the nature of the lockdown, the highly authoritarian stuff that was going on in Britain, people getting arrested for going to a park or for the heinous crime of visiting their parents. Brits kind of extrapolated and thought, well, everywhere else in the world is exactly like that. And that just wasn't true. But then furthermore, Brits couldn't accept that other places were different. And the truth was along with the other Five Eyes countries, you know, the English-speaking countries of Britain, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, that really was the epicenter of what the rise above people and I call the Soviet Union, this new digital authoritarianism. The second time I encountered it face to face was when we visited England in October 2022. So about 6 months ago, something like that. And anyway, I met up with this guy who I'd known like for, I don't know, like best part of 30 years. And conversation kind of turned to the Britney Spears and the Boosters, and he sort of said, oh, well, you kind of escaped to Finland, and you know, and he kind of said, well, you know, I did that because I was afraid of the I can't mention that the deadly thing that you can't see that never existed. You know, and then I can't remember exactly how he said it now, but his inference was that, oh, well, you must have had the Britney Spears, you know. And then when I told him, like, no, I've not had the Britney Spears, nor was there any coercion here in Finland, he just couldn't believe it. He went into meltdown about it because I'd literally just met him in the pub after he'd been to the Britney Spears and the Boosters for his fourth go, and he wasn't a happy bunny about it. You know, he just struggled to accept that he'd been coerced and manipulated. You know, maybe he felt ashamed of it, and his default solution to that was just to deny that his situation was special and that everybody else must have been in the same miserable boat as him. And he had to deny reality. He was denying that he himself had, he caved in. I guess what I'm saying here is that it's kind of a weird assumption that he had, and I think many Brits have, is that everywhere else in the world must have been exactly like how things were in the UK. And the truth that these people are denying is that it wasn't. And in the future, things won't be any better until Brits actually accept that they were targeted for special treatment. Now, obviously, if you're a subscriber to this channel, you're probably not like either of these people that I've just described, these Brits that I've described, and you probably do understand that different countries have different cultures and radically different ways of doing things, and you're kind of happy with that. I think I've always been naturally drawn to these types of people, the type of people who are happy to acknowledge reality, even when it's unpleasant, rather than trying to deal with problems and situations by denying their very existence. And I think that's also shown up in my preferences when I'm watching videos, so people like Marty, Bucko, Lee from Veritas, Vincent, Tim, Fair Play Now, Rise Above Lads, Sheep Farm, and many others. These people, I'm drawn to them because they do acknowledge that different countries are different and they've got radically different cultures and very different ways of doing things. And these people are interested in those things, and they're quite happy to make comparisons. So I guess what I'm saying here is that this video isn't really addressed at people like them who are interested in the possibility that other people can do things better than you can. And the right thing to do is, I think, in that situation, is just to show some humility and listen and learn, and then maybe, cherry pick the good things that other people in other countries are doing, and maybe learn from the positive aspects of their culture that are better than yours. Unfortunately, though, there's not enough Brits who are like this, and there's still far too many who respond to a problem with an angry denial. So nothing changes because you can't fix a problem that you're not even willing to acknowledge. So I think, if I think about Finland's quite interesting. It's had to fight for its freedom from Sweden and Russia. And if you talk to a Finn and you praise Finland, or there's some good news story about Finland, the Finnish response is normally to question it and say, well, yeah, we're good, but we could do this better, or this is wrong, so they actually have this. Then they're not like these kind of Brits who still think that the sun still doesn't set on the British Empire, and they think that Britain's one of the best places in the world to live. The Finnish kind of mindset is more one of continuous improvement. It's like, oh, yeah, so you say things are pretty good here. Yeah, but we think things could be even better, and we need to do X, Y, Z. So the culture's constantly moving forward here, because Finns are more readily willing to accept that there are problems here, and then that acceptance then drives the impetus for people to look for solutions. Whereas if you think that Britain's absolutely fantastic, then you end up with a lot of conservatism with a small c, that nothing can be changed because we don't want to wreck the magic formula. So, I would think about the NHS in that regard. There's still way too many Brits who, one minute they'll say, oh, well, the NHS isn't very good. But then the next minute they'll say, oh, it's our NHS and it's the envy of the world, when it quite clearly isn't the envy of the world. So what I'm saying here is that I think there's a massive problem with denial. So I'm just going to talk about some of these denial points. First one is that The truth is, British living standards for the average man and woman have been in very, very sharp decline over the last 40, 50 years during my lifetime. And I, it's not unfair to say that, I don't know, maybe 70, 80% of the country, it now looks, sounds and smells like a third world country. But unfortunately, nothing seems to be getting done about it, because you've got this sizable proportion of the British population who they won't acknowledge the problem. These are the people that when you see them on holiday, they've got the Panama hats and they're giving it the big one over, trying to give it the big one over Johnny Foreigner. The sun still doesn't set on the British Empire and all of this. And they're like a fat person who's not going to lose weight, because they're not at the stage yet where they're willing themselves to accept that they're fat. And until they do that, nothing is going to change. They're deluded. Again, I'm going to emphasise this, that not all Brits are like this, but a significant proportion of them are. And these are the people that are holding the country back. I've here in Finland, I've come across some more enlightened Brits who are a bit more humble. I think that's a good word, humble. And they'll demean themselves, by speaking a few words of Finnish to them. They might be visiting as a tourist or whatever, but they'll actually make the effort to at least have a few words of Finnish, so they don't immediately start off a conversation by bellowing at somebody in English, which is just like a common courtesy. And the flip side of that is maybe somebody who visits Finland on business or something, and you've got a Finn who's maybe giving a PowerPoint presentation in English, and the Brits like maybe making some disparaging remarks about this presentation. The quality of the English, or the English is a bit stilted or whatever. And this will be from a person you can guarantee who's never given a PowerPoint presentation in any other language but their own English. So it's just this. I think Britain needs to lose. Some Brits need to lose this arrogance that they have, which is, I guess, it sort of stems from the fact that Britain did have quite a proud history, a long history. But then, I think for a long while Britain's been living off that history, whilst at the same time denying the reality of what's actually currently happening in Britain, which is this, as I say, a massive slide in living standards. And as I say, nothing's going to improve until you actually acknowledge that. And I guess something else that's really, I don't know, it's tough really, is that now I think Brits are not even allowed to celebrate their own history. So they live in that kind of congested island where they're not even allowed to celebrate their own culture anymore. And that was one of the main things about Britain, was its history and culture. But you can't celebrate that anymore. The one thing that was great about Britain, its history and culture, that's racist now. You can't talk about that. Another thing that I've noticed, because I used to teach economics, is that there was in Britain a big denial about what's been happening to the economy. So when I was a kid growing up in the 70s, people rode about on Raleigh bikes that were made in Nottingham. Britain produced television sets and Bush TVs. So in the 80s and 90s, we had a lot of the manufacturing in Britain shutting down and being offshored. So it wasn't just the manufacturing output that was lost, it was also the jobs, and even more importantly, the manufacturing incomes that were lost. So wages, manufacturing wages, went out of the window, and what replaced them was a property bubble and debt, which is completely unsustainable. In the long run, really, to run an economy, you need to produce things if you want to consume. And what we've been doing is just producing less and just temporarily trying to desperately maintain what's left of our living standards through the use of debt, which basically condemns you to getting poorer in the long run. But Brits are in denial about that. They'll still say, well, we're a great country, you know, Britain's really rich. You know, you'll see them in Greece, places like Greece or Portugal or Spain, and they'll strut around, you know, as if they're the bee's knees, when there's not that much left of Britain that is kind of like superior to most of the places in Europe. In lots of Europe, living standards are appreciably higher than in modern Britain. So again, what's the point in me saying this is that Brits are in denial about what's happening. And if you're in denial, you can't solve the problem. You can't fix problems that you're not even prepared to acknowledge. So that's what's going on. It's like a childlike tendency to ignore problems, brush them under the carpet. So, you know, again, going back to Divok, you know, thinking about it, people just ignored the fact that I don't think it's feasible really to sort of say, well, we're going to pay a sizable proportion of the working population 80% of their wages to stay at home and do nothing, and provide £50,000 bounce back loans with very little scrutiny. This was always going to end in tears. But I think, again, this is this denial of economic reality. You know, Brits went along with the Divok LARPing, the live action role play. They collected their printed money, and they weren't acknowledging that this was going to cause problems. It had to cause problems in the future. In some ways, it reminds me of what I saw in schools towards the end of my teaching career. You know, you'd always have kids that didn't like reading, and because they didn't like reading, they weren't particularly good at writing or comprehending when they were asked to read. So these people would then try to offset their kind of the problems of their own making by, you know, getting their parents to cheat for them by paying for an educational psychologist's report so that they would get 25% extra in public exams. So, you know, the denial there is like denying your own shortcomings. Like, if you really wanted to get better at reading and writing, maybe you should actually spend more time reading books and less time maybe computer gaming or playing football or doing TikTok videos. And what I like about Finland is that there is a greater emphasis on personal responsibility. You know, you're expected to own your own problems and then figure out a way of putting your own shortcomings right. So there is no such thing as dyslexia in Finland. Certainly there's no routine awarding of extra time in exams in Finland like there is in England. And if a kid isn't particularly good at reading or writing, they're just told to, you know, maybe you need to spend less time on Facebook, you know, or less time computer gaming and more time reading books, and then maybe your writing skills and your reading skills will improve. I occasionally read a few web forums, and it helps me to gauge the mood of what's going on back home in Britain. And I must admit, I've been a bit worried recently about what I've read. So in particular, there was a cold spell in Britain. I think it was it November, December time, 2022. And a lot of Brits, they couldn't afford to turn on their central heating properly. And some of these people on this web forum, they were like, there was a whole thread about it, and they were posting pictures of indoor thermometers showing temperatures. I think the lowest one I saw was like in a bathroom or something like that, 12 or like 14 degrees inside a house. And many of these people had kids. You know, some of them were could only afford to like heat one room. And you know, you would say and at the same time as well, I remember one of these people, it was like you'd say to them, well, you know, maybe you need to like work a second job or something like that. You know, if you've got like a wife and kids, you know, you can't allow them to live in a cold, damp house that's like only 14 degrees C in the winter. And one of these guys, he kind of writes back and goes, "Oh well, that's my choice. I want to save up the money so I can go on a cruise," you know. And For me, this is a classic example of denial, right? If you're in a position where you can't heat your house above 14 degrees and it's damp and you're going to get mold growing in there, this is your family's health that you're talking about. But again, I think this is another example of denial. These people, rather than facing up to problems and doing something about it, their solution to the problem is just to deny the problem exists. So of course nothing gets done. So it's not that I want to like slag off these people or anything, and I wouldn't post in my video. I wouldn't include pictures of or make any reference to who these people were. But I just felt incredibly sorry about these poor bloody kids that were living in houses that weren't properly heated in the middle of winter. And again, for me, this backs up the point that I was saying before, that Britain is rapidly becoming, if it's not become, in many parts of the country, a third world country. But Brits are not prepared to accept that. So nothing will get done. So you could call these people, you could call them Fantasy Island Brits, living in the past. You'll see them out and about abroad with their Panama hats on and their red trousers, walking around with their like boating shoes on and stuff, trying to give it the big one, that they're so rich and cultured and whatever compared to these heathens in the foreign country that they're visiting. But the reality of this is that Britain itself is nothing to write home about anymore. I say this to Finns, who haven't visited Britain for a while, that you won't recognise the place. Or you even notice it with Finns who are about, I don't know, 20, 30, something like that. And they've been taught English at school. So sometimes they'll talk to me in English, and they'll say things like, you're welcome. So they'll go blah, 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 blah. You'll say, oh, thanks. And then they'll say, you're welcome. Now, phrases like that, polite phrases, not really in use anymore in Britain. The culture has changed. It's no longer the same place. Britain's become sort of demoralised. I guess it's because, the conscious mind is trying to deny that these problems exist, but the problems are real, and in the subconscious, it's demoralised them. That they know, or the subconscious mind kind of realises what the true state of affairs is, and that's what's going on. Again, like in many other countries that I've visited, the attitude is different. It's one more of like continuous improvement. So the two that strike out for me are Finns and Israelis. So when you go there, they're curious about different nationalities and how things are done in your country. And if they think that you're doing something better than them, like their ears prick up and they watch and learn. And so for example, in Pori, where I live, there's 3 really great Neapolitan pizza places. And those people, they've bought all the wood burning ovens. They bought all the equipment in. They went away, studied how to make Neapolitan pizza properly, and it's absolutely fantastic. They pay attention to detail. And the point that I'm making here is that, to do that, you've got to accept that other cultures and other countries might do things that are better than what you're doing, and you need to have a little bit of humility and actually learn from what other countries are doing better than what you're doing. But if you're in denial, and you think that the sun still doesn't set on the British Empire, then nothing will improve. And that the NHS is the world's best health service, then nothing's going to change. Another example, from this forum concerns food, because there's been food shortages in Britain. And also something that I've noticed is that over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a sharp decline in the quality of the food sold in Britain. And and then you've also got stuff like the shrinkflation on there, and even things like Stella Artois beer that's brewed in Britain. It used to be brewed at 5.2%, then it got knocked down to 5%. Now it's 4.6%. The quality's gone down. You're paying for more water and less beer than what you used to. And also, when I moved here, it was a bit of a revelation just to see the superior quality of the food. And what I've noticed is that here there's more of a decentralized supply of food. There's more localization. So a classic example is tomatoes. So over here in Finland, there are indoor heated greenhouses that supply fantastic tomatoes, even in the middle of the winter. So you can buy cheap Spanish ones in some places that are like, I don't know, a third of the price of the domestically produced ones in the winter. But the taste difference is light and day for the simple reason that if you're growing tomatoes in Pori, they don't have to travel very far to be sold in a supermarket in Pori. So they can be picked when they're ripe. So they actually taste great. Whereas the tomatoes that are eaten in Britain, they're maybe grown in a greenhouse in Spain or Holland maybe. They then have to be transported, all the way over to Dover. Then when they're at Dover, they go to some Tesco centralised distribution depot and then out to a local supermarket. So you couldn't pick them in Spain ripe, because by the time they'd get even to Dover, they would be mouldy. Then they go up to the distribution centre. Then they'd be completely rancid by the time they would reach the supermarket. So in Britain, you get tomatoes that are taste like cardboard because of these long, highly centralised distribution methods. And the same applies to many other products, meat, fish, dairy products, say like most of the vegetables. They're all localised. It's all the stuff that's sold in the supermarkets, even baked goods. There's 5 bakeries in Pori, and if you go to a K market in Pori, they'll sell bread made by bakeries in that town. Whereas if you go to a bakery in Oulu, you'll get bread sold that's been made in Oulu. There's always local manufacturer stuff on display in whatever town you go to, and that applies to even things like beer as well. In many ways, like Finns are a bit like Italians in the sense that they're quite loyal to not just their country but also to the region of their country. So you try to explain to people like that's a good system. Maybe Britain could actually learn from some of that, and maybe it might be a great idea for us to produce more of our own food, to have more localized food supply. So you try to explain that to some people on this forum, and guess what the reaction is? You're lying. No, you're lying. So this one guy, he finds a picture of a fishmonger's, and it's got this Kirio lohi, sika, kuha, all the other Finnish fish basically. And then in a corner there's some frozen, fresh sort of tuna that's been frozen, that's come from somewhere. And he uses that as an example, he tries to, oh yeah, but look, and same with citrus fruits and stuff, of course those are imported. But many of the products that are sold in Finnish supermarkets is much more localized supply chains, far more decentralization. Same would apply for health provision of healthcare in Finland, far more decentralized than the NHS. But the attitude of some of these Brits is they just go into denial. They can't accept even the possibility that another country might do things differently to Britain. Imagine that. Some countries do things differently. Can't accept it. Never mind, some countries do some things differently to Britain, and they actually do it better. That's can't accept it. Just will not accept it. And this is a problem, because unless you accept it, unless you accept you've got problems and shortcomings, you're never going to generate the energy and the momentum to try to fix things. And this is a massive, massive, massive problem. I'll post up some images now of this greenhouse that grows tomatoes in the snow in Finland, just so you can see for yourself. You know, just thinking about this now, I remember like in Britain, you know, Britain's an island, so we should have fresh fish, you know, in supermarkets. But I always, particularly like the some of the supermarkets in Guildford, you couldn't find fresh fish. You'd always smell the fish counter, whichever supermarket in Guildford it was. You'd always smell it before you'd see it, because, you know, again, what's happening is that the fish gets caught, maybe by a British trawler, or maybe probably more likely a French trawler, then travels to one of these big distribution centres that are run by the British supermarkets, hangs around there for a long time, and then gets shoved out on another truck out to the Tesco in Guildford or Sainsbury's in Guildford, and by the time it gets there, you know, it is what it is. It's decomposing and rancid. So in conclusion, what am I saying? I'm saying that all of us really need to acknowledge problems. As I say, I feel sorry for many Brits who are not like this, but, you know, they're living in a country where there's this critical mass of people who are living in denial, basically, and they're a bit arrogant, really, and that they don't think that they've got anything to learn from other countries. And everybody must be doing it the same as them because, you know, the sun still doesn't set on the British Empire. And then the other thing that I would say as well is that if you really want to learn what another country's like, and you want to access its culture, you've got to learn the lingo, basically. And obviously there's a massive problem with that in Britain. Brits just don't even want to try. And again, you just come back to this word, don't you? Arrogance, basically. And I think even from a selfish point of view, if you actually make an effort to speak the lingo, then people will treat you better. So yeah, that's all I want to say. So don't live in denial. It's not good for you. So all the best. God bless.